Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I'm so happy to be sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Love every chance I get to do this. We also have a roundtable on Friday, as regular listeners know. And for this first hour, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews, or commonly known as Buddy Matthews, who's hosted this show many times himself and joined the roundtable. So I'm glad you're here.
Well, thank you for having me, Debbie.
It's a funny thing. I think we're 1 minute into the show, and I feel like we've run out of time for all our topics. I'm going to quick tell people what we'd like to talk about today. I want to start with North Korea. The summit is coming up next week. In fact, on Tuesday. And
that's actually about 9 o'clock our time in the States. So it's a late Monday our time.
Around the corner, yeah.
Yes.
And then G7 is occurring right now.
Right now, yes.
So we'll talk about G7. We're going to talk at 12:30 with Congressman Dave Bratt, who is a congressman from Virginia. He's got an amazingly interesting background. He has a theological degree, a seminary degree. He has an economics degree. And we're going to talk with him about where we stand on the amnesty, all that's occurring in Washington, the effort to push out a vote onto the floor related to amnesty and DACA. And then we're going to talk about the Supreme. In the second hour, we have another roundtable guest joining us, Jeremy Dys, and going to talk about the Supreme Court decision. I'm sure it's been a topic on every radio show all week long, the Masterpiece Cake Shop. But there are some new points I want to talk about that. And then this prison reform movement, I thought was a great topic for today. So, and then in the last hour, I want to talk about how the senators behaved badly, so they lost their summer recess. And I want to talk about what's going to happen with that. If we're really going to hold on to pushing to make the Senate stay in session, especially to address some of the appointments they are delaying. So lots on the table. I'd love to have your calls. You're so welcome to call in any time. Our caller line is 800-351-1212. So I want to start with North Korea. So here we are. After the summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was on, off, on. We're
in the on phase right now.
Yes, and a lot could change before Monday at 9. But I'd love to just to start with on this topic. I know you spoke about it recently in several different media appearances. You're dealing with a leader, a dictator in North Korea who's just
a harsh dictator. And I mean, there are dictators out there. There's not many as bad as him.
Yes, and so there have been voices, advocates saying, before you even sit down with this guy, or as you go to sit down with him, you need to be making a lot of demands on him about whether he should step back from his, it's really a surveillance state society. It's dictatorial rule. So, I mean, I just love to get your kickoff thoughts about as President Trump approaches this summit in North Korea. Is he in a position to say, in addition to denuclearizing Mr. Kim Jong-un, you're going to have to soften your regime, or is that just a crazy idea?
Secretary Mattis has made it clear that the key thing they want from this, and the only thing that it makes this a successful thing, is if North Korea agrees to denuclearize. Perhaps over a period of time, there may be some things that go on, some steps that you take for this, but that's the criterion for success. But there's several things that are involved in that, including North Korea wants us to pull our forces out of South Korea. I suspect, from what I understand, Donald Trump is willing to do that, perhaps over a period of time. But you also have Japan and others. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was just at the White House discussing this. My guess is in those discussions he was saying, we want to make sure that if you move forward with this, that Japan is protected, that we aren't going to be subject to provocations from North Korea. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, but I think Donald Trump set the right approach when he said, we're going to go. This may work out well, but if it doesn't, we'll just walk away and maybe we'll do something later.
Yeah, I love that tone. I agree that President Trump is not acting as though he's positive this can occur. I think what happened, backing up to when the deal was pulled off the table, I think that North Korea perhaps watched what happened in America under President Obama.
I think that's right.
And negotiating with Iran and thinking we're going to get a deal like Iran where we don't really surrender our nukes, we just pretend. And what happened was, from a statement by Vice President Pence, I mean, the basic summary was the premise that President Trump's proposed deal, security and prosperity on the par with South Korea in exchange for complete denuclearization. And when Vice President Pence said that set, or not those exact words, but that was the idea. That set the whole thing off kilter.
Right. And then President Trump, remember, said, okay, well, they've quit talking to us, so we'll just, the deal is off. And all of a sudden, the North Koreans apparently got interested again. I hear people saying, and I think you want to be very, very cautious with Kim Jong-un. I hear people saying that this is, you can't trust him. We haven't been able to trust him in the past. I think you go in with that sort of mentality. That said, sometimes countries decide to take a different direction. Saudi Arabia has been doing that under Crown Prince Salman as they're starting to move and liberalize the country. Some other countries may do that as well. Well, Gorbachev did that under Russia. So I don't know that we expect this, but it may be that Kim Jong-un is saying, if I can have my dominance secured and I can control this country, then I'm willing to do this if all the stipulations that we have are met. Don't know if it happens, but it might.
Yeah, there was one point that Claudia Rosette, who is she's a prominent writer. She's been in many different places writing about foreign policy, and she was essentially saying, in America, when we make a treaty or any kind of deal, our country is full of, we have an underlying media presence that will report, and certainly antagonistic media will point out, well, you said this, but you're doing this. We have a media holding our leaders accountable. We don't have just a dictator. We have an entire government and a party in opposition that will hold people accountable, but it's a different dealing with this dictator because he is not a benevolent dictator. He's a very harsh man. The stories are just legendary of his merciless, lethal conduct toward anyone he even slightly thinks might have been a little bit disloyal to him, failed to clap profusely enough during a ceremony. He'll have them executed. So this is a dangerous guy. And her point was, they don't have that in North Korea. They don't have anything like what we have here. And I think it was a great point to make. I don't know what you take from that, because she was saying, well, you maybe just have to say, to start with, you can't have such a totalitarian state anymore, Mr. Kim Jong-un. Is that too much to say?
I think it's going to be strong if you expect him to sort of drop a lot of his principles. But, again, you have changes. Mao Zedong eventually shifted over to Deng Xiaoping. And he had a different approach. He began to open things up. Things are still awfully closed in China, but it's made a little progress from when it was under Mao. So we can be hopeful, but we want to be very, very guarded in our optimism.
I couldn't agree more. I want to talk about North Korea more when we come back from the break, because this is it is probably in the top 5 of the world's worst actors. I mean, the leader of North Korea, you can put him in there with Iran and maybe a few others you choose. But this is someone who has kind of taunted America and held talks and famously with President Clinton. Oh yeah, sure. Well, we'd love to have your nuclear energy understanding. Don't worry, we're not going to use it for nuclear weapons. And so we've been tricked by him a little bit, and he's just not known for being a square dealer. So I think it could be a very important stuff for the world if we can bring him to the table to actually talk. And it could be. But I love that President Trump appears to be going in with his eyes wide open. Debbie Georgatos, Dr. Merle Matthews, Point of View. Come right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the questions many liberals are asking these days is what happened to Alan Dershowitz. The emeritus Harvard law professor has been critical of the Mueller investigation and talks about the criminalization of politics in his most recent book. But the real question should be reversed. What happened to all the liberals who used to demand that our civil liberties be protected by government? Victor Davis Hanson reminds us of how liberals were riding high after the Watergate scandal. Even before that, they were leading the charge in criticizing the overreach of presidents and their bureaucracies like the FBI and the CIA. They rightly criticized the intelligence agencies for spying on American citizens. Those days are but a distant memory now. Liberal politicians have downplayed or excused Watergate-like abuses of power by the former Barack Obama administration. Liberal journalists apparently have few concerns that the FBI apparently used at least one secret informant to gather information about the 2016 Trump campaign. And they didn't seem too bothered about the national security team unmasking the names of U.S. citizens. Civil libertarians seem indifferent that Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign paid a foreign agent, Christopher Steele, to compile dirt on Republican candidate Donald Trump, and that the details of the dossier were leaked. There is, of course, much more than this, but even this very short summary illustrates the remarkable change not in Alan Dershowitz, but in the liberal establishment. They believe that President Trump is a danger and therefore turn a blind eye to abuses they used to criticize just a few years ago. That's why they should really be asking, what happened to us? I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Debbie Georgatos and just love sitting in Kirby Anderson's chair every chance I get. And this is our Friday afternoon roundtable. I have Dr. Merrill Matthews, Buddy Matthews here. We're talking about North Korea, and we do welcome your calls on Point of View. The call-in line is 800-351-1212. So on North Korea, we were talking during the break, and I want to kind of go back to this point. There's a lot of discussion about the things that North Korea has said about this upcoming summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea that will occur in Singapore this coming Tuesday, or as you point out, it's Monday night our time. But one thing that North Korea is saying that they have to have, or their goal is the removal of American troops from the South Korean demilitarized zone.
Demilitarized zone, right? DMZ.
Yeah. Yeah, and also they're pushing for they want the removal of, and I don't have it right in front of me, but they want the removal of the nuclear umbrella from Japan and South Korea. And so I think you might be a nicer person than I am, Buddy Matthews, because I'm going to tell you that my view on it is only when we're good and ready and we actually have complete it's part of the battle is sequential.
Right.
We have access to every single site within your country, and whenever we want, unannounced. You completely denuclearize, and then maybe we'll talk about that. I think that's about what we have to do with him, but you think it's too much?
I agree, and my guess is it will be a process, which is to say we'll take away some of ours, you take away some of yours from South Korea and Japan. We'll take away a little more, you take away a little more. And if it does something like that, I think it might work. But I think we also have to remember, you have hawks in there. You have John Bolton, who is looking over this process. You have Mattis, and you have John Kelly is going to Singapore. You have serious American generals and foreign policy experts who don't give a lot of credence to North Korea. So I think I think anything we come up with would be a would be more verifiable and would have to be stricter in terms of things that are going to happen. And if Trump is able to get some kind of commitment along that, it would be a great start.
I do think it would be, too. The expression that was used, that one of the demands that was being made by North Korea, or just, I don't know if we call it yet demands, requests, but by Kim Jong-un, was they wanted to have a removal of the nuclear umbrella from Japan and South Korea. What does that mean? Do you know the term nuclear umbrella? Do you know what that means?
Oh, yes. It means that we have ours in there, and any attack upon those countries is considered an attack on the U.S., and we have nuclear capability which will protect them from that. It could be sea-based. There may be some land-based. I don't know. But we have those there and ready to go. And the other thing here is, This is a different approach than what we had from George W. Bush.
Yes.
George W. Bush wanted to export democracy, understandably, and try to get those in other countries. They wanted to sort of make those things contingent upon other countries pulling back from some of their harsh human their harsh tactics that they use on their own people.
Yes.
Trump, I don't think, is going to go quite that far. I think he's more of a realist here, in which you say we try to get some things, and if that works, maybe you'd get some more a little bit down the line. But he's not making all these things, as far as I can tell, contingent upon turning the countries into democracies, trying to get human rights stronger. You try to get that a little later, but you start the relationship here.
You know, it's one argument I was reading, it's just very interesting, is, of course, North Korea views its nuclear weapon capacity, whatever it really is, whatever they really have, they view that as their protection in the world. They are relatively isolated. They have a fairly good relationship with China, and China has been their protector. And now China's, I think, there's a lot of talk about it, but China pushing North Korea, saying you better start dealing with America, because now America's putting pressure on China on tariffs. So China's maybe putting a little more pressure on North Korea. So all that is juggling around. But there's been a lot of talk about this idea that if Kim Jong-un wants to get, I'm going to jump and get to the point I want before we run out of time. I want to talk about this idea that Mark Thiessen, I don't know how to say his name, from AEI was pointing out, CVID, which is complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. I love the tone of that. I love the message. It's not, well, would you gradually step back a little bit, then maybe we'll give something more. I think with a leader like Kim Jong-un, you have to send the message. The only way, I know what I was going to say about protection too is, yes, their nuclear capacity makes them feel protected. So if they're going to surrender that, it really makes sense. They want to say, okay, America, but right now you protect people in this region, South Korea and others. We want to be part of that protection. And I mean, I hate to sound sympathetic toward North Korea, but I can understand why they're saying, if we're giving up what we think is our only protection, you got to do something to make us feel safe.
And one of the things that would probably include would be a scaling back of our military exercises that we do in the region. Remember, one of the reasons that Kim Jong-un got upset was we were doing military exercises with South Korea in that region. They feel that as a provocation and as a threat. If we're not going to be a threat to you from North Korea, why would you need to do these things? So, I don't find that very compelling, but from their standpoint, you might make the case, yes, they see that as something that is a provocation. We just got through with what they call the RIM exercises.
Yeah.
Those we disinvited China to be part of that because of certain things China's been doing. So that's around Hawaii and so forth. So we do a lot of these military exercises, but we would have to, I suspect, from their standpoint, make it clear that what we're doing is not a threat to them, either by inviting them to participate or by not being too close to North Korea.
You know, it's a funny thought, too. While you were talking, I was thinking about how the pressure on North Korea to have the leader back off from being so totalitarian. And in North Korea, it's just an example, the surveillance state. It isn't just that, for example, they closely surveil the military or the police. It is schools, homes, farms, everywhere. You're afraid to move. And that kind of depiction of the world in 1984, that George Orwell's book, where you were afraid to speak because someone would hear you say, I'm not sure I agree with the president, something or other, and you just be gone. And so it's that level of, and so I think, though, probably among the biggest fears Kim Jong-un would have, if he lost that surveillance state, he loses control over the people. And this is something he's held just death grip control, as did his father and grandfather, and he's been more and more with this way. but he feels like, how do I keep myself in power and safe if I don't have the surveillance state in place?
Right. And it creates a situation for us in which we will probably have to agree to something which doesn't dethrone him, let's say, and then that raises the question, are we somehow or the other in compliance with him and doing it? And that's always a tough question, but this is where you get down to the practicalities of foreign policy. What do you do to make steps, and how far can you go and still achieve something?
Yeah, I have to say, I think, when President Trump was in the nomination process, or when he was running, and then when he became president, one of the biggest concerns expressed, I mean, there are a lot of people who had concerns for various reasons, but one of the biggest concerns was he doesn't have State Department experience, he doesn't have military experience, he doesn't have congressional experience, he doesn't have government experience. Mm-hmm. So he's coming into this presidency with not having the background a lot of people have had, and there was fear especially about his foreign policy. He would just be a cowboy. He'd be the same kind of guy he is when he speaks. He's quite outspoken, but we'll see how this all plays out in North Korea. But I think bringing Kim Jong-un to the table, and especially Kim Jong-un, as we were talking about a minute ago, is coming back to the table. Yes. Because I think President Trump has caused North Korea to be a little bit worried about America, a little bit unsure of how we're going to behave.
Yeah, the North Koreans may think that President Trump's crazier than their leader. So, but it's interesting because, as you pointed out, Donald Trump has said they accused me of taking the world to nuclear war. In fact, we're having some of the most interesting denuclearization discussions that we've had in a long time.
Oh, it's just a great thing. And, people also can be critical of some of his appointments, the people he's putting in place, like John Bolton being a great example. Mm-hmm. He's on the conservative side. The strong military supporters were just jumping up and down with joy when he was named National Security Advisor. Others were saying, oh, my gosh, he's kind of a hawk. It's not a new discussion in America. You have the discussion over the decades in various contexts about, are we better off? Do we do better as we are friendly and chatty and agreeable, or do we do better sounding America be tough? At least for right now, given the situation in the world. I don't know how I feel about John Bolton. I'm pretty excited about his presence.
I've always liked John Bolton. Don't know if I always agree with him, but I've always liked him, and he's certainly knowledgeable. But one of the things that happens, and this is Trump coming in from a business background and not having spent years in politics, it took him a while, and you could predict this, to find the people who were really going to be able to work with him. So Mike Pompeo's head of State Department, when he said Rex Tillerson, I thought, that might be a genius appointment, but it might be terrible. But it just took him a while to find those people he's going to be able to work with who can do the job.
Absolutely. This is, we could talk about North Korea probably for 2 hours, but because we're kind of putting a break, I want to mention for our listeners, we have a guest joining us by phone in the next segment, and his name is Congressman Dave Brat. He represents the 7th District of Virginia. He's a Republican in Congress, but the topic I want to talk with him about is there's something called a discharge petition ongoing in Congress. The basic goal is to force a vote on the floor of the House about some immigration/amnesty type bills. I want to hear his take on it, so don't go away.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Good afternoon. Thanks so very much for tuning in. Debbie Georgatos sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And my roundtable today, I have Dr. Merrill Matthews or Buddy Matthews. I meant to do a better introduction, so very quickly, he is a resident scholar for the Institute for Policy Innovation, which is here in Dallas. He's an amazing expert, a writer. He's testified in Congress. He's a health policy expert. He's contributes at Forbes. He's on the Texas Advisory Commission for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. So a very well-rounded, substantive, just love having him here on the roundtable. And we have on the phone our guest I mentioned before the break. I believe we have on the phone Congressman Dave Brat. Hello, sir.
Hey, Debbie. Great to be on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I was mentioning on the break, Congressman Brat was here in Dallas. The show is coming from Dallas, and he was in Dallas this past week. Had the opportunity to meet him. Love his energy. And with the two issues I want to get to, because as I told you, time just flies by on radio. There's something impending in Washington that I think that it's great to have people understand more. And the term is the discharge petition, but it's an effort by some people to circumvent the committee process and, frankly, the leadership of the Republican Party, and bring to the floor of the House 4 different bills that relate to DACA and amnesty. Can you just tell our listeners what's going on with that?
Yeah, well, you set it up just right. So we got, some members of the Republican Party that they're in tough districts and they're frustrated, but their frustration, they're taking it out. They're working with 200 Democrats to put in this discharge petition. So they're going against the president and Paul Ryan and McCarthy and Scalise and everybody and leapfrogging over leadership. And they're putting in place this Queen of the Hill procedure where you have the 4 bills and the one that gets the most votes wins. Well, if you got 200 Democrats voting, guess what's going to win, right? It's going to be the full-out Dreamer amnesty bill that gives an amnesty to 10 million folks over 10 years. And we have, in any other case, bills just go through. And the Freedom Caucus gets frustrated, too, with some of the process issues. But the Goodlatte bill is the good conservative bill that contains an end-to-chain migration, does E-Verify, et cetera. And E-Verify requires legal hiring, and it's probably the most important component that ensures you won't get another amnesty again in 3 or 5 years. If you pass a Dreamer bill, can you imagine what happened? You just sent a signal to the rest of the world. There's no wall going up. There's no border enforcement. There's no rigorous immigration policy. And they just let 10 million more folks in with no discipline. And so that'll send a magnet, right? It's just a green light. Come on in.
That was my next thing. Is that this sounds like a giant magnet. Well, the way this discharge petition works, because there are 435 members of Congress, you have to have 218, so it's just over half of the members of Congress, elected congressmen, sign on to get this discharge petition. So basically, it takes the bill away from the committee and puts it right onto the floor. And there are 4 bills they're actually seeking to have voted on. So last I checked, they still don't have 218 signatures. Is that right?
Yeah, they have them. It's just a formality. They're holding them. They've given leadership. I mean, this is quite right, the language I'm using. They're giving leadership until Tuesday to come up with a compromise bill that they like, provides a pathway to citizenship of their liking, or they're going to go with the Democrats. And so, and it's kind of shocking because leadership does have the ability to shut this down. All they need to do is put the Goodlatte bill on the floor, and that ends this discharge petition. And so why leadership is going along with this in any way, shape, or form, I do not get. And to add to the cynical nature, these folks have put it in, the discharge petition in, right after primaries come to an end and right after the American people no longer, get a say in the thing. And that happened 2 years ago, 4 years ago when I won, right back in 2014. There was a huge push right in June as well. So, it makes you pretty cynical about the strategy strategy here.
And Congressman, there's no real chance this would actually become law, as I understand it. So it seems like a political move because there's very few discharge positions that actually make it through the House. The Senate would still have to approve it. I don't think there's any effort to go in the Senate. And then if it doesn't include funding for the wall and a few other things that President Trump has demanded, he wouldn't get a presidential signature. So this looks like more theater than actual policy. So it's not clear to me why Republicans are going along with it. A few of them, anyway.
Yeah, well, that's right. And that sets up what's interesting. There's a group now that's going around with the moderates in this group, and they're trying to form another bill by Tuesday. And that, is probably going to end up being not a substantive policy bill, but a political bill. And the problem there is that might be able to pass the Senate, right? If they do some simple thing like, let's just do wall funding in exchange for DACA and for an amnesty. It depends how they structure that. That could possibly get votes, and then it would be up to the president, depending on whether he wants a deal or not, if it goes all the way through. And the problem with that is what I was explaining before. If you just do a wall's great, but half the immigration problem is visa overstay, et cetera, right? So
right.
If you don't do substantive policy, you're just going to have this DACA problem and all the political tension and anxiety and all the hatred that's buzzing around out there. I don't like any of it. I went to seminary way back, right? So we're trying, but you got to have good policy and the rule of law. And the irony of ironies is, look at the folks who are coming here. They're coming from Honduras, Guatemala. It's going to be Venezuela next, where they've had a breakdown of the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
So the last thing we want to do is give up the features that have made our country so great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so if this process, I did not realize until you said it, that the discharge petition advocates actually already have the votes they need. I thought they're too short. So basically now the pressure's on the speaker or the Republican majority to say, give us a bill we can all do, or else this is going to go down. So the Republicans who are in this, supporting this Democrat-led effort to do the discharge petition, these are people who have a serious concern about reelection. They're worried about their constituents. I mean, what is the reason they're onto the Democrat side?
Yeah. A lot of them have, heavy Hispanic populations, but the Goodlatte bill gets all the DACA kids out of the shadows, right? So the Goodlatte bill is the compromise bill, but some of the folks that are upset, they're upset about ag issues, so they want more cheap labor. And then the Chamber of Commerce yesterday came out. We have a million legal immigrants per year. The Chamber came out asking for another million, right in the context when this discharge petition is out. And so, I mean, that doesn't go unnoticed by a lot of people.
But Congressman, in a period where we have 3.8% unemployment, don't we need workers out there, especially in agriculture? I know in construction area, I'm hearing construction people saying we can't get the workers. We bumped up the prices to $15, $20 an hour, and we just cannot get the workers.
Yeah, no, that is true. I hear that from everybody. So the unemployment argument is partially true, but and you just heard the data this week. The number of job seekers is about equal to the number of jobs there are. So that's great news. But there's 10 million people still out of the labor force altogether, and part of the problem is our K-12 system isn't preparing kids for business, et cetera. And so the cheap labor crowd, and it's much easier to just import labor. But we still have 10 million people out of the labor force and a huge welfare problem. We have welfare legislation in the Farm Bill that's not punitive. It's all positive. It's just to get people out of poverty traps into the labor market. And so you kind of want that pressure on us as a country, so we got to fix it. And then after you fix K-12 and the labor market and get welfare to work going.
That's a big order.
Yeah.
Fix K-12, labor market, and...
Yeah, it's a big lift.
It is. You know what else I think is amazing in this whole scenario is what I thought President Trump showed in the 2016 elections is that there's been such a unwillingness among conservatives to take tough positions related to immigration and border security. And so many people on the left and the media tried to say, just characterize President Trump as out of step with the American people. They don't want to hear him talking like this. They don't want a secure border. They don't like all of his advocacy for immigration reform in a conservative way. And yet that seemed to be one of the major issues that propelled his victory. So it seems really odd the Republican majority is helping the Democrats at this point when this is what certainly they're creating a bill. It sounds like that President Trump's going to have to veto.
Yeah, I think so. I think it probably does end up falling apart. But you're right. And Senator Obama ran on immigration reform with E-Verify, and Bill Clinton in his State of the Union, and Barbara Jordan, the African-American civil rights leader, back when Democrats used to care about the worker.
Exactly.
But now it was just Bernie, right? Bernie kind of cared about wages and the worker, and then they rigged it against him.
Yeah.
And now the Dems are just doing all this identity negative politics stuff. And so, yeah, it's a crazy world out there right now.
It is. Congressman Bratt, we're going to zip off to a break. When we come back, I want to ask you about Trump's $15 billion rescission spending bill. Come right back.
Economist Walter Williams says it's dishonest to boast about the nation's highly touted 80% high school graduation rate. The National Assessment of Educational Progress for 2017 showed that 63% of 12th graders were not proficient in reading and 75% were not proficient in math. Dr. Williams says when it comes to college, there's a big disconnect when only 37% of white graduates test college ready, and yet about 70% are admitted to colleges. For black students, the disconnect is greater. 17% of black high school graduates test as college ready, yet colleges admit 58% of them. Colleges cope by offering remedial courses and majors with few analytical demands. These courses often include the term studies in their titles, ethnic studies, gender studies, etc. And sadly, ill-prepared graduates often major in education. Walter Williams is not the only economist asking the question, how necessary is college anyway? Brian Kaplan, like Dr. Williams, is a professor of economics at George Mason University. He wrote a book titled The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. He told the Wall Street Journal that a college education is worthwhile for the individual. Full-time workers with bachelor's degrees are making, on average, 73% more than high school graduates. Yet, he says, many majors and fields of study really don't teach things that students will use in the jobs they eventually get. He asks, why is it that employers would pay all of this extra money for you to go and study a bunch of subjects that they don't actually need you to know? Dr. Kaplan says getting a college degree signals someone will be a good employee. But today, a college degree is a prerequisite for jobs that once did not require one. We need to ask, is the public and personal money spent today on education buying us enough? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. Debbie Georgatos at our roundtable today, Dr. Merrill Matthews, Buddy Matthews, and online, Congressman Dave Bratt, who is a Republican congressman from the state of Virginia, 7th Congressional District. So on the break, Congressman Bratt, we were talking about the Goodlatte bill, which both of us had liked very much. And one thing I'd love to have you just elaborate on, because I think it really matters, the tug at the heartstring issue for a lot of people on this issue with DACA is that these people who fall in the category of DACA, they really did come here without voluntarily knowing. I mean, they were brought by their parents when they were very young. So they were dealt with in the Goodlatte bill by saying, well, you have a permanent status. You can stay here, and you re-up every 3 years, wherever it was, and you don't have to go, and you can travel freely, go home and come back, which they can't currently do, but you don't get citizenship, because citizenship, the reason I care about that is because it involves voting. That struck me as just the most fair and reasonable compromise of all. So what is your thought on the Goodlatte bill, Congressman Brett?
Yeah, no, I've been for the Goodlatte bill since the beginning, and that is a fair compromise. And now that they're talking about a bill going forward, and the 25 Republicans that are working with the Democrats want a full path to citizenship. And so I don't think that's going to happen. But that's the negotiating point that is really under scrutiny right now.
You know, Congressman, a friend of mine who is a Iranian by birth, he's an immigration lawyer now, but he has suggested to me that what we need to do on the visa overstays that you mentioned is privatize that. If you're coming in on a visa, you buy a bond. And if you overstay your visa, the bond people come looking for you, and they make sure they present you to the authorities because you've overstayed, and it's cost them money if they don't. So he sort of used the bail bond process as a private sector way to address that problem.
It's a good idea on first blush. It incorporates free market principles, and it's logical.
Okay, so it sounds like you hadn't heard that floated before in Washington. Is that right?
No.
Me neither. I'm hearing it the first time, too, sitting here. Also, I want to give you a chance, since you're talking to all of our listeners, and certainly some in Virginia. You're part of the Freedom Caucus in the House. Can you just tell us what the Freedom Caucus, what's it all about? Because I'm very much grateful for them, but what are you guys trying to do?
Yeah, well, Jim Jordan was our chairman last year, and Mark Meadows right now. He sums it up as good as anyone. He just says, we try to keep our promises to the American people. So a lot of politicians run, and they say, I'm for free markets, and I'm against cronies, and I'm against amnesty, and I'm for tax cuts, and I'm for reducing spending is a biggie. And then when they get to D.C., they vote the opposite. Whereas the Freedom Caucus, we've got pretty good voting record. You can go look us up on, Heritage, the scores there, and all the other, conservative review. And you'll find we all get hundreds or, 95s or whatever. And a lot of the members are down in the 50s on these basic metrics that capture, Republican voting standards. And so we kind of lead the fight. And so the media, like on this amnesty issue, they say, well, you Freedom Caucus guys fight, once in a while, too. And I said, yes, we always fight, and it's for the Republican platform, right? This is 25 Republicans on the discharge petition fighting for the Democrat policy platform. And so it's kind of a good way to juxtapose and contrast the two groups.
Well, Congressman, given your point about Republicans not keeping their promise, in March you passed a $1.3 billion, $1.3 trillion, right, spending bill.
Right.
And then we're now talking about a rescission bill of $15 billion that, as I understand, is mostly money sitting in accounts that's not being used anyway. And so some of us say, well, it's a step, let's do that. But my goodness, this almost looks like a slap in the face to fiscal conservatives who feel like we ought to be spending less money in Washington.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the vote was tight. I mean, it only passed by 4 votes, so you got no Democrats. And it probably won't get through the Republican Senate, which will be another slap in the face. And the Senate has been the problem the whole year. The House at least did our budget on time, right? We did all the approach bills and plus up the military. Mm-hmm. And then the Senate at the end, in order to get 9 Senate Democrats, they plussed up the budget by $400 billion. And so that gave you that $1.3 trillion. But the Senate also failed on Obamacare repeal. And we just have hundreds of bills sitting over there that they are not executing on. So we need a little change over there in the Senate.
We do. I actually was a tiny bit heartened when I saw that Senator McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, has told them that he's taking away their summer vacation. I mean, they get 1 week to go home, and then he's saying, you know what, you have to come back because there's too much sitting here that you don't do. So do you think he's going to stick to that?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, they have judges. And a lot of it is just throwing a little discipline at the Democrats who have blocked everything as well.
Right.
And so sometimes I don't hit our Democrats hard enough. But, this year, just to cite, they had 107 Democrats vote for the Democrat progressive budget to raise taxes $10 trillion over a 10-year window. Raise spending $11 trillion. Can you imagine what that would do to the economy? And you never hear a word of this from the mainstream media. And so now they have a bill in to get rid of the tax cuts in the face of, now we're looking at 3% economic growth the next quarter, maybe 4% for a quarter. And so the contrast is just staggering.
And if you get Nancy Pelosi come next January, you may be taking votes on that.
Oh yeah, no. Oh, we'll be voting on tax increases and impeachment and amnesties and everything under the sun. Gun
control, single-payer health care. Right. Yeah. Honestly, your points about just the tax bill the Democrats are supporting as we're not close yet. It always feels like the November midterms are right around the corner. Mm-hmm. Actually, still months away. But, the idea of getting the American public used to, look at the more money you're bringing home because of the tax cuts. Look what will happen. It's like we need someone to put out an ad, do the math, what will happen to you.
Yep. No, I don't get what has happened to the Democrat Party. I mean, they've gone to the Progressive Party. They're not the old standard liberals, right, who used to care about the fundamentals. And now they're going off the deep end. I think the American people are going to catch on. I think they're catching on as they're seeing money in their pocket coming from us. So I hope everybody's waking up.
But I'll also say, Congressman, Republicans are the worst marketers I have ever seen. You do these things, right. You do great things at times, and then we hear almost nothing from it. All we hear is the Democrats talking about how bad it is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I told our marketing people $10 trillion, right? I said, you guys haven't mentioned that they just voted to raise taxes $10 trillion. No one knows that. And then I asked the political types, about indivisible and all these resist movements. And we don't tell the people what's going on with the very, very progressive left wing of the party.
Well,
we should.
We're doing our best here in Texas. I mean, at least on this show, we try to share that information about the way your life would change under a Democrat majority. And on my own radio show, America Can We Talk, I'm always talking about, forget about putting words and labels and even party names. Just look at the policies. Look at the outcome in your life.
That's right.
Well, Congressman Dave Brat, I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I know you're busy up there in Washington. I'm so glad you could call in to Point of View Radio. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. If folks want to look me up, I'm at davebrat.com, and there's a nice red button to hit if you really like me.
davebrat.com, 1T, Dave Brat. Love that. And thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, guys.
Okay, folks, we're going to go off to break here in a moment. But I do encourage you to read about him, even if you're not particularly politically active. He's really kind of an amazing person in Congress. His background is a combination of a theological degree, a seminary degree, an economics background, economics professor. He's bringing a lot of the qualities of thinking to Congress that are needed. So, okay, zipping off to a break. We come back. We're going to hit the Bakery decision in the Supreme Court. There's a lot more to say about it. Come right back.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the truth team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. I'm Debbie Georgatos, sitting in for Kirby Anderson on Point of View. Just love being here. My Friday afternoon roundtable, which just makes it all that much more fun. We have Dr. Merrill Matthews, who was here the first hour and still with us, fortunately. He is a resident scholar at the IPI, Institute for Policy Innovation. He is a scholar and writer and expert on many topics. I have my own radio show, love having him on. And also we have joining us now this hour, Jeremy Dys, and he is a lawyer with the First Liberty Institute. He's the Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty. And so welcome. Glad you're here.
Well, thanks for letting me come in this late to the game.
Well, we have so many more topics. I said right at the beginning, I feel like we're already out of time to hit everything we want to hit. So I want to talk. I'm sure in this show this week there was a lot of discussion about the United States Supreme Court decision relating to the Masterpiece Cake Shop, the case in Colorado involving a baker, an owner of a bakery who declined to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, or to design a cake for a same-sex wedding based on his religious views relating to marriage. And so that case made its way to the Supreme Court, and they issued a decision this week. And there's been a lot of controversy. That's why I'm so glad Jeremy's here to ask you about this. But there's been a lot of characterizing of the Supreme Court decision as very narrow, even though it was 7-2, which doesn't sound narrow, but narrow in the court ruled in favor of the bakery owner, Jack Phillips. But the basis of the decision was very, very narrow. So just to start with, would you describe, Jeremy, for us with your expertise, what that decision really said?
Yeah, no, look, and you're right. It is a narrow opinion in terms of the breadth of what the justices decided, but it is very broad in that it was 7 of 9 justices that all agreed on the principal point. And the principal point that was made in a majority opinion written by Justice Kennedy is that the government cannot act with hostility towards the religious beliefs of its citizens. I mean, that's the summary of it all. It took several more pages and a lot of citations to cases to bear that out, but that's essentially what Justice Kennedy was saying. In other words, he wants an environment in which people are able to be fair with one another, neutral, especially if you are an arbiter of someone's activity or actions. You have to show neutrality. You have to show that you are a fair person. You got to give the guy a fair shake. And effectively what Justice Kennedy said, and 7 justices agreed with him, is that Jack Phillips didn't get that fair shot. Say what you will about the ultimate issues, and those are left for another day, as he said at the end. Those cases wait a further elaboration by the courts.
Coming soon.
Would have been nice if we just gave that elaboration
now. To be
now.
continued.
Right, but we've got other cases that are going to bear that out, including some of our cases. I hope that will bring some clarity to that issue. But he took to task very heavily the prejudgment by the commission in Colorado. And specifically, certain words they used both in the media and the press, as well as in the hearing itself, that indicated some tremendous unfairness there. For instance, one of the commissioners indicated during the commission hearing, is one of the second hearings at least that was going on there, that the use of religion has been used to do all manner of bad things, all kinds of justifications to do evil and horrible and wicked actions, including things like the Holocaust and Nazism and what have you. And I remember when the oral argument, maybe you remember this too, but during the oral argument, Justice Kennedy himself pressed the attorney for the state of Colorado and said, did they ever disown that? And they did not. I mean, at the commission hearing, the second commission hearing, at all the courts of appeal that have gone on. I mean, this happened in 2012, so it's been 6 years since this happened. And in all that time, the state of Colorado has stood by their guns that religion is really just a code word for engaging in some form of bigotry towards other people. And this is not something that is uncommon just to commissioners. When people hear their elected officials acting with hostility towards religion, guess what they do? They mirror them. And so you've got politicians all over the country that like to use the same kind of language. You've got low-level officials that think themselves incredibly smart and wise that want to sound like the president or the House of Representatives Speaker Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Bernie Sanders, whomever. So they're going to imitate that language out there as well. And then you're going to have people that follow them that are going to say that in between the times. So you've got individual citizens, neighbors of ours, that are going to be saying, "Oh, religion is just a way to do a lot of damage and a lot of harm and a lot of bad things." And so what's important about this decision, and I think it's vitally important, and I could get into some of the legal nerdery behind it all, but the really important part of this is for the Supreme Court to say, "Hey, stop it. We've got to engage in neutrality with one another." The state itself has to be neutral towards individual religious beliefs of its citizens. And when they act without that requisite neutrality that the First Amendment requires of them, then what they've done is, in all of what they've done is suspect. And if you're not going to give a fair shake, then we're going to just simply invalidate it. So yes, it is a narrow ruling, and in that it applies directly to Jack's case and pretty much that only. But just to dive into the legal nerdery for just a second, there's a case that they reference there. And I like to say this case because it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. Because the name of the case is the Church of Lukumi Babluai. Yes. And it's a fun word to say, or fun case to say anyway. But that was a case having to do with chickens and a religion called Santeria. Mm-hmm. And I find it personally kind of unsettling myself. But, it's a religious practice. And they tried, the city there tried to kind of zone that out and use some neutral things, but they were kind of hostile in the process as well. They were trying to target that specific thing. Well, in that case, only 2 justices really stood out for the proposition that was engaged in religious hostility towards religious beliefs. You have 7 justices at the Supreme Court now agreeing that there is this thing called religious hostility by a government actor and that the people need to be protected on it. There's a whole lot more to be said here, but that's the nub of what's started here.
So do we have a sense as to how they might go on other cases? Because my understanding is in a number of these cases that have arisen, the gay couples are actually looking for proprietors that they can go and challenge that way, mm-hmm. in essence, to create a case that can then go forward and they can try to establish a principle, as opposed to this just being, oh, we just really wanted to go to this person and they wouldn't do it. My sense is some of this is being actually pushed to try to create a case.
Well, probably. And you got the reports today out of some moron out of Tennessee that put up a sign, "No gays allowed," on his window, and everybody should be outraged by that because it's outrageous. That is wrong. It's deplorable, and he should stop. And if there's a boycott, I'm joining it because that is the wrong thing to be done.
I think he's taking it down, but yes, and because there was a lot of reaction, just like what you're saying.
I think, I'll just be as bold enough to say, I think he should shut his business down. He should not be doing that. That is not Christian dignity that is being afforded to others, not Christian charity that should be afforded. But to answer your question, we can get into this later after the break, too, further. Justice Kennedy wasn't the only one to write the decision on that, right? He wrote mm-hmm. the majority opinion, which 7 justices agreed. You've got Justices Kagan and Breyer on one concurring opinion. You've got Justice Gorsuch and some of the other conservatives on his opinion and a concurring opinion. Justice Thomas writes a concurring opinion. But let's not also forget the 2 justices that wrote a dissenting opinion here mm-hmm. that basically said, hey, this is perfectly fine. Even the wrong language about how religion is used for all kinds of nefarious purposes, they're perfectly okay with that. That's scary to me.
It is. And, we're going to go off to the break, but I want to just plant the seed with our listeners and both of you before we do. There was a statement out by a woman who is a man, James Essex, who is the director of the ACLU LGBT and HIV project. And because this decision was based, as we were just hearing from Jeremy, on what the words were by some people in the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, really condemning people for having religious beliefs related to this argument by this person is nothing in this case would prevent this bakery owner, Jack Phillips, from getting sued again over the same issue because all the court found was that he could have discriminated, just can't be mean about it. Come right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, when the Apostle Paul made it to Athens, he was able to present the gospel to the Greek philosophers in a place known as the Areopagus. The Romans referred to it as Mars Hill. It was a place where various perspectives and ideas could be expressed, and today we call it the marketplace of ideas. Now, when I was in Athens, I was struck by the fact that you could see the Parthenon from this adjacent hill where Paul spoke to these philosophers about the unknown God. In fact, there's a plaque affixed to the hill that actually contains Paul's message in Greek for all to read and consider. Centuries later, John Milton gave a famous speech known as the Areopagitica, in which he defended the right of freedom of speech and expression. Those principles form the basis for the modern justifications for free speech and marketplace, where various ideas and ideas can be expressed. The name of the speech was derived from the place where the Apostle Paul preached, as recorded in Acts 17. Following Milton were philosophers like John Locke and John Stuart Mill, who expressed the idea of a marketplace of ideas. They understood that truth could only be discovered if all views and opinions were considered. They rejected the idea of censoring viewpoints and banning topics and perspectives from an open, robust discussion. So why the brief history lesson? Well, I do so to remind us of the long and valuable tradition of a marketplace of ideas. That is not what you find on very many college campuses today. That is not what you find in some of the social media platforms. The academic elite and the media elite are quick to censor divergent views, especially Christian views. I think it is time for them to go back and learn the history of providing a marketplace of ideas. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. Debbie Georgatos, Jeremy Dys, and Dr. Merrill Matthews, Buddy Matthews. So we're talking about the Supreme Court decision this week, in the case involving the Christian bakery owner in Colorado. And I tried to ask this question before the break, and I was talking too fast. I want to make it clear what this statement was that was out in the press. It was focusing on the fact that the Supreme Court seemed to be saying that this bakery, they ruled in favor of the bakery owner because they read into the record, they discussed the animus, the hostility showed by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission and others toward Christian belief related to marriage. So the decision seemed to be saying the reason that the bakery owner won was because these bad statements had been made, and had they hadn't been made, maybe he wouldn't have won. So this is a statement by James Essex, the director of the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project. We read this decision as a reaffirmation of the court's long-standing commitment to civil rights protections and the reality that the states have the power to protect everyone in America from discrimination, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. I see no reason in this opinion that Masterpiece Cake Shop is free to turn them away. She went out and basically said if they were to come in again, the same circumstance were to occur, this Supreme Court decision would not protect Jack Phillips. Is that right or wrong?
I think it's pretty close to accurate, actually. There's not been a clear definition, a clear rule as to what's going to happen in the next circumstance. So, for instance, First Liberty, we represent Aaron and Melissa Klein, bakers at around the same time with Jack Phillips, politely declined a previous customer of being forced to participate in their same-sex wedding by creating a customized wedding cake for their nuptials, and so they were brought up on charges as well. And they went through this whole process at the same time. So we're waiting to find out how's that going to play out there. We're at the Supreme Court of Oregon right now, the Oregon Supreme Court, waiting for them to decide whether they want to take the case or not, and that could provide us going forward. At the end of Justice Kennedy's opinion, he said that the outcome of cases like this and other circumstances must await further elaboration in the courts, all in the context of recognizing that these disputes must be resolved with tolerance, without undue disrespect or to sincere religious beliefs, and without subjecting gay persons to indignities when they seek goods and services in an open market. So that's as close as he came to giving us a three-factor test, right? First, it's got to be done with tolerance, without undue respect to sincere religious beliefs, and without subjecting gay persons to indignities as they participate in the open market. I can get behind that, as a matter of fact. I think that's perfectly acceptable. The problem will be is that many of these commissions are going to have a hard time abiding by that. As we've seen with the commissioner, or whoever it was that you read there, we've seen this with Brad Avakian. We saw this with Colorado Civil Rights Commission. You see this with politicians all over the country. The main argument has been what? That religious beliefs is code for discrimination. It is code for bigotry. And there's been a real deep-seated motivation to diminish and disparage religious beliefs. And so that's going to evidence itself in a lot of different ways. First, it's going to evidence itself in how they speak. They'll talk about this, and they'll say how bad it is, how religion is awful. But look at Aaron and Melissa's case as a great example. They not only did Brad Avakian say it, he also then went on and penalized Aaron and Melissa $135,000. Well, why? What did he penalize them for? For causing emotional offense in the fact that they quoted a Bible verse in their store. The magnitude of that penalty alone demonstrates significant anti-religious bias, and we've got cases on that kind of thing throughout the country already.
Jeremy, this is. I see so many more instances of things coming up that will be, if not exactly on this, at least around the fringe. We heard this week the Miss America contest is going to change its thing, taking out the swimsuit, taking out the evening gown and high heels and so forth. And then the notion crossed my mind, what if a transgender woman, a male who identifies as a woman, says, I want to go join the Miss America contest and participate in that? Can you say, no, you can't do that, given all the things that are swirling here? And I don't know if I have a good answer, because that's not a religious issue, but it's participating in an open market where historically only women have jumped in.
I'm going to mention to our listeners, if you're enjoying this conversation, love to have you call in if you'd like to, if you have a question or a comment at 1-800-351-1212. And Jeremy made reference to something. I want to just tell you, this is I find it amazing. And this was, I think it's in one of the links at pointofview.net. If you go to the website, this article is up from the Wall Street Journal, but it contains a statement, a quote from 2016 from the chairman of the United States Civil Rights Commission, who wrote in an official paper that the code religious liberty, in quotes, and religious freedom, in quotes, remain code words for discrimination, intolerance, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, Christian supremacy, and other forms of intolerance. And I really think that, if you think about a person who's made it in life to this position, it isn't like this was just a random stranger on the street spouting off. This is someone who holds a position of responsibility with the United States Civil Rights Commission, and they're essentially saying that if you hold a view related to marriage based on your Christian or Jewish faith, other faiths too, but if you hold a view about marriage as a man and a woman, it couldn't be sincere. You could not possibly believe that. This has to be just hidden animosity toward others. Yeah,
well, let's just go to Justice Kennedy to respond to all that, because I think he bears out some very important language here. And towards the end of his opinion, he says that the Free Exercise Clause bars even subtle departures from neutrality on matters of religion. That's not even close to subtle. That is an outright departure from neutrality to religion, what you just read there. And he goes on to say, it hardly requires restating that government has no role in deciding or even suggesting whether the religious ground for Phillips's conscience-based objection is legitimate or illegitimate. I think it's very important you point these things out, and you remind folks that you're listening. Point this out to people that have this discussion with you around the kitchen table or at Thanksgiving or wherever you find yourself around the water cooler or elsewise, to remind them that even saying what this commissioner said, and that's a popular talking point by the left right now, to say that religion is somehow awful and bad and terrible, wait a minute. The government is not allowed to make that discussion, not even allowed to have it in relationship to my religious beliefs. So if they're going to be spouting that in political campaigns, guess what? We're going to use that. Oh, by the way, you know who set the precedent for that is the left itself. Just a couple weeks ago, President Trump was told that he couldn't block someone on Twitter, for goodness sakes, right? So now they're going after otherwise private conversations or using personal accounts and that sort of thing to shut these things down. They went back to Trump's comments on the campaign trail as justification for why the Muslim ban has to be overturned, right? All these different things. We're going to pull these things in as well. And it's appropriate for us to do so as well. Anything that comes before the United States Civil Rights Commission, the attorneys would be derelict in their duty if they didn't bring out that quote in every one of those things and cite Masterpiece in doing so.
Yeah, this is I love in the show, of course, to talk about the cases in the Supreme Court and cases we pursue, but I also like to get over into the cultural conversation. I get on this all the time about how they say that what is the expression? Politics is downstream from culture. But culture is downstream from religion, and I mean, it's my little saying I say in my show. But I mean, there's a need in society not to just wait for the courts to tell us what is and isn't true. There is a need for a cultural reassertion of within America about people's values and their right to have them respected, especially their religious values. And one article, I can't remember if we put it up or not at pointofview.net, but there people talk about, and the left has kind of captured the talking points on so many topics, as you were saying earlier. The conservatives are just terrible at messaging. It's just sad but true. But, the left has this talking point about, well, we're the ones standing for equality. Your view that same-sex marriage doesn't have to be treated the same by everyone denies our right to equality. And, that is a bogus talking point. We'll hit that one. The other one was, you have a right to your religious freedom until it harms somebody else. Well, who gets to say what harm is? And who gets to say, I mean, I would say the clients have been harmed more than that same-sex couple. And the last one was, to get clear on it, is the idea that people are told that this decision really was saying, we don't serve people like you. And, implying that it will permit businesses to say, well, we don't serve people of a particular ethnicity or race. And it doesn't say anything like that. But these are the things that you'll hear people say. You should be ready to respond to them. So I know we're quick on time here. We're running out of time in this segment, but just the harm one, I think is a great one to start when we come back from the break, talking about this idea that, you have a right to your religious freedom until you harm someone. So is a same-sex couple who had to drive 2 more blocks to find a different bakery harmed? Or is the baker who's basically had to pay for legal fees and basically has his business and life interrupted for 6 years? Wasn't he more harmed? I mean, where's the harm? I mean, the harm analysis has to include what is happening to people who are trying to assert their religious values and bring their values into their daily life and practice. So if you're listening, I see we have a caller. I will come back after the break and be happy to take this call. And I'm Debbie Georgatos, and this is Point of View. So glad to have you here, Dr. Matthews and Jeremy Dys. We'll be right back.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Hello, and welcome back to Point of View. I'm Debbie Georgatos, and here this afternoon with Dr. Merrill Matthews, Buddy Matthews, and also Jeremy Dys of First Liberty. Okay, so we have two callers. Thank you so much. And I'll also give our phone number out again. The phone number, if you'd like to call in, is 800-351-1212. We've been talking about the Supreme Court decision relating to the Colorado baker who did not want to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. So first, I see we have Marvin in Georgia. Okay, I'm not too clever with this, but let me just click on. I think Marvin. If I hang up on you, come back. Let me try. I think this is going to get you. Hi, Marvin.
Okay.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi. Welcome to Point of View.
Thank you very much. Good topic. During the Obama administration, Christians were told that we not only have to accept homosexuality, we have to embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
The baker did not have a problem with selling a cake to anyone. He didn't want to be involved with designing it. When you come to designing something, you have to somewhat take on the mentality of the person who was buying that. And if he would not have done it to their specifications, they may have charged him with doing it without the proper respect. And to think that you're designing a cake for an act that God calls an abomination, then you're turning your back on God. And I can imagine a photographer, a Christian photographer, going to do a homosexual wedding, and then you're photographing all their lewd things that may come. And I could feel for each one. Fortunately, I haven't had to come across that, but that's the issue right there. They want us to just take it in and make it part of our understanding, our comfort zone, and just do anything that the liberal left wants us to do.
Marvin, that is such a great point. And it's funny, we were just talking about that in the break, about how among the big issues we haven't directly discussed today is that this designing a cake, as it was in the, especially I know that was talked about in the case involving the Oregon bakers, but this cake too, it is like being asked to make a speech in opposition to something you deeply believe in, or to write an article about something it's a freedom of First Amendment protection that you shouldn't have to write or say things you don't believe. It's a great point, Marvin. Thank you. It looks like Jeremy wants to chime in here too.
Yeah, look, I think we need to understand the facts of all these cases that are out there, because there's a lot of intentional misleading that's going on about them. It's portrayed as if someone walked in and said, I want that cake right there, please give it to me. No, you're gay, get out of here. No, that is completely opposite of what had happened. In fact, I was yesterday, I was in Oregon with Aaron and Melissa Klein. I happened to fly out there to see them for a couple reasons, but I was talking to them, and I was reminded of what Melissa had done with her shop, and Aaron as well, but she was asked to create divorce cakes. And she said, I'm not going to do that. No, I can't celebrate what God doesn't celebrate as well. This is just something against what we believe. We can't do that. I know Jack Phillips would not create Halloween cakes, would not create cakes with alcohol or drug references on them. There's a whole litany of things that he just couldn't lend his expression to. But it reminded me also, Aaron and Melissa did that. They had served this couple before. Well, that seems a bit odd, doesn't it, that they had served this couple before? They provided cookies to a birthday party or something like that. No problem. We're happy to do that. Had they walked in and said, I want those cookies over there, they would have sold them the cookies, and it would have been fine. Same with Jack Phillips. He'd have done the same exact thing. That's a totally different situation, and I think you see in that case where these couples these bakers are providing the dignity that is required of others, and the fairness and the kindness and all that. What they've objected to is being compelled by the state, or anybody else for that matter, but specifically by the state, to create a message, to express a message with which they have a fundamental moral disagreement with. And our First Amendment has a long history of protecting that exact thing. In fact, it's so fundamental that the ACLU themselves has published on their website, and I haven't checked today, but my guess is it's still there, and they have an entire page dedicated to freedom of expression, and it goes into all kinds of deviant art and that sort of thing. And there's a long constitutional law course on this in law school if you want to have more information about it. But the bottom line is, and even on these variety of things, you go back to the remember the 80s where they had the National Endowment for the Arts sponsored the crucifix inside of a jar of urine. That one, we won't talk about what the title of it was, but that's apparently that was art. And the lesson we learn out of that, and this is what the ACLU said, quote, freedom of expression for ourselves requires freedom of expression for others, unquote. That's the ACLU, and I agree with that statement completely. Now, I just wish the ACLU was representing Jack Phillips and Aaron and Melissa Klein. They're not. They're prosecuting them. But the reality is, if we're going to have a commitment to free speech, religious liberty, the freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, we must give space for others to be able to express themselves, even ideas that we find noxious and objectionable.
And including that freedom to not express. If you're just said, and what he's saying, Jack Phillips and others are saying is, I don't want to send that message out. I don't want to be, and so it's a freedom to not express things. As we were talking in the break about, if you are a speechwriter, if you're a singer, anything where you should not be forced to say or speak things that are contrary to what you believe. So great point, Marvin. Thank you very much. We also have Gary on the line from Arizona. And let me just see if I managed to get you online here. Hi, Gary. Welcome to Point of View.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I have 3 lesbian friends. I've been friends with, I didn't meet them all at the same time, but I've known them for years. And one is a retired school teacher, the other one is a barber, and the other one is a caregiver. In fact, the caregiver I led to the Lord, and we pray together. They're mad, basically. They're hurt. That's what they've expressed to me, because they know what the Bible says, about it's an abomination unto the Lord. I said, the Lord loves you, but he didn't create Adam and Bruce. He created Adam and Eve. And I don't agree with this LGBT community forcing someone or going back, trying to cause them problems and possible bankruptcy and all these terrible things just because you want to push your agenda down somebody's throat. You're not going to make it that way. Like I was telling the gentleman that I spoke with originally, I said, wait a minute, I think I almost lost my point. But
well, we've already made a great point, and I do want to chime in and just say, I just think there's a lot of effort in the left and the media to try to portray anyone who does not find a spiritual, religious, moral acceptance of same-sex marriage to think the only choice is you either accept marriage of same-sex marriage or you're hateful. And the truth is that there's a wide range of thought in between. And I think many people who hold a sincerely held religious Christian belief in traditional marriage, they're not hateful. They don't hate other people. And I love to hear your friendship with your friends you described, your 3 lesbian friends. And I think most people I know have family friends, frankly, family members who are living in same-sex relationships. And there's not a need to even, I think it's an unfortunate dimension of this issue to have the effort made so harshly to characterize you either agree with the LGBT agenda or you're a hater.
And that's exactly what the point of the court was saying in Justice Kennedy's opinion, is to say, look, we're in this post-Obergefell phase, and say what you want about Obergefell, and maybe you're right, you're wrong, I don't know, but the point is, it is what it is today. And we've got to figure out what a post-Obergefell world looks like. And in the eyes of Justice Kennedy, who wrote Obergefell and now writes this opinion, it means that we're going to have this space for everybody to be treated fairly. That means that, at least under Obergefell, same-sex couples have the right to be treated fairly when it comes to marriage and other things. Under the First Amendment, it also means that the state can't tell them that your religious beliefs are suspect, that they're less than dignified, that they're wrong. The state has no business infringing on that whatsoever. So as we unpack what that means, we've got to be able to preserve that space for one another to be able to have those disagreements and still call each other neighbors. This is going to be hard because the political argument of the day is to condemn religious belief of any kind. And so that's going to require a complete rewiring for the left side of the argument.
Where does this leave us if the person has a strong belief, but it's not religious based? That is to say, if the baker had said, my parents always taught me that gay marriage was wrong, and so I believe what my parents taught me, not because I base it in the Bible, but it's just a strong belief I have.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that is going to have to be elaborated later on. Number one, they're not going to make a religious objection to it, obviously, so the religion clauses are kind of out.
Right.
But Justice Thomas spent a long time talking about the speech element here involved.
Yes.
And can the state compel you to speak a specific message that you disagree with as well? That's what the court has left for another day. Some would call that dodging, but I think they've just simply left it for another day to discern.
You know, there is an I can't remember the name of the doctrine, but there's a doctrine in constitutional law that I vaguely recall from law school that basically the court never makes a decision if they find a way to resolve the case on an initial basis. They don't have to dig in, and they don't have to answer the unanswered questions. They don't have to get to every possible root of it. And so I think that's part of what we were seeing in this case. So we get the rest of our callers after the break. Don't go away.
Economist Walter Williams says it's dishonest to boast about the nation's highly touted 80% high school graduation rate. The National Assessment of Educational Progress for 2017 showed that 63% of 12th graders were not proficient in reading and 75% were not proficient in math. Dr. Williams says when it comes to college, there's a big disconnect when only 37% of white graduates test college ready, and yet about 70% are admitted to colleges. For black students, the disconnect is greater. 17% of black high school graduates test as college ready, yet colleges admit 58% of them. Colleges cope by offering remedial courses and majors with few analytical demands. These courses often include the term studies in their titles, ethnic studies, gender studies, etc. And sadly, ill-prepared graduates often major in education. Walter Williams is not the only economist asking the question, how necessary is college anyway? Brian Kaplan, like Dr. Williams, is a professor of economics at George Mason University. He wrote a book titled The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. He told the Wall Street Journal that a college education is worthwhile for the individual. Full-time workers with bachelor's degrees are making, on average, 73% more than high school graduates. Yet, he says, many majors and fields of study really don't teach things that students will use in the jobs they eventually get. He asks, why is it that employers would pay all of this extra money for you to go and study a bunch of subjects that they don't actually need you to know? Dr. Kaplan says getting a college degree signals someone will be a good employee. But today, a college degree is a prerequisite for jobs that once did not require one. We need to ask, is the public and personal money spent today on education buying us enough? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. So glad you've tuned in this afternoon. And Debbie Georgatos filling in for Kirby Anderson. And we're talking about, well, actually, we're off on other issues now. We were talking originally about the Supreme Court case involving the baker, and then just kind of how we handle discrimination claims in society, who gets to make them. And I see we have a caller from Georgia, Priscilla from Georgia, on a, I guess, related topic. So let me see if I get you on. Priscilla, hi.
Hi, Dan. Thank you. I just wanted to say I don't understand why that if a baker has a business and he's not discriminating against someone's ethnicity, their race, and but and he wants to do the best job to put his whole talent and artistry into it. Why can't he say, I can't do this, but I do know there might be someone else who can get this done the way you want it, but because of my religious belief, I will not be able to pursue. I will not be able to do this. And there's no evil. There's nothing wrong with that. So tell me, why cannot they establish that point?
Actually, I'm glad you raised that, Priscilla. That did occur in this case and other of the cases also, where the customer, the same-sex customer is told, I can't bake that cake, but there's a baker 2 blocks down, or they're close by. And I remember, I think it was actually Jeremy in the case in Sweet Cakes. Someone had looked at within a 10-mile radius. There was an enormous number of bakers available. And the answer, which you're getting at, Priscilla, really is what I think an important topic about how many of these cases are set up. They are part of an agenda among the LGBT activists to say, not only do we want the right to marry, which we now have under Obergefell, we're going to make everybody else in society, agree with us. You cannot disagree with us. It's a prodding of society to just drop their religious beliefs in order to honor advocacy for same-sex marriage.
I think that's absolutely right. They could easily have gone someplace else. They did not want to do that. They want a test case where the Supreme Court will come out and affirm that you, as a religious person, must not just tolerate, not just accept, but you must affirm their position as right and appropriate.
And the other thing I was thinking, and maybe Jeremy, you have a legal thought about this, but in generally speaking, discrimination cases, the court will look at, did an employer attempt to make a reasonable accommodation? I know this is a little bit transferring a different issue, but, if you at work, if you had an employer, a place of business that said no one can wear any hat or head covering, and you had a Jewish employee say, I really have to wear my yarmulke. It never falls off. It's not in the way. The court would say to the employer, can't you make a reasonable accommodation here? And probably would require, if that person had sued over losing their job, then you have to make that accommodation. It seems like that standard should apply in these cases. It's the bakers. The court should be able to say, well, the baker isn't going to bake the cake. It's not a precise analogy, but the concept should be there.
Well, that's why I think Justice Kennedy was frustrated, because there was no attempt by the commission below to consider the fairness elements as well. Consider they went through 3 different cases that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had reviewed, all of them saying things of disparagement to a certain either religion or to other gay people or whatever it might be. And the cake shops refused those, and in the Colorado Civil Rights Commission were like, no problem, that's perfectly acceptable. In other words, the complete opposite of what they did to Jack Phillips, they permitted in 3 separate cases. And so the Supreme Court says, wait, whoa, this is clearly unfair. This is clearly unfair, where you allow them to say these things that you agree with, but you won't let them say the things that you disagree with, or you won't let them do the things you disagree. That's where the unfairness comes in, and that's why I think going forward, while we have said this, yes, is a narrow decision, it's going to be really difficult for county or for civil rights commissions around the country, these extra legislative judicial bodies, quasi-judicial bodies that are out there that have a tremendous amount of power and influence. Consider Bureau of Labor and Industry, for instance. Brad Avakian was basically the chief judge and executioner in that case, right? He did the entire investigation. He sat in judgment. He issued summary judgment without even argument by Aaron and Melissa first. It's really remarkable how much these administrative courts, how much power they actually hold. And so I think it's going to be very difficult for them to remain consistent in their application of these quote-unquote non-discrimination laws and do so without the appearance of a lack of neutrality.
Absolutely. Priscilla, that was a great point. I appreciate that. Thanks so much for calling. And we also have Roy in North Carolina, whom I'd like to just get credit for not messing up the board here. I'm actually clicking on the right things, learning something. So I believe we have Roy in North Carolina. Hi, welcome to Point of View.
And how you all doing? And I want to commend you all for the fantastic job that you all are doing there. But my point on this issue, and hopefully I have the acronym correctly here, the LBG or LBJ. I think that it's a political thing, and do I think it's going to go away? I would say no, it's here to stay, and anyone that voices their opinion, whether you, and I want to make this clear too, whether you are saved or not, because there's a lot of people that are not saved, they don't agree with it because they know that there's something that's, it's right before you, and when you see something that's wrong, it makes no difference. You can see it without you being saved, such as I am saved myself. But even when I wasn't saved, I knew things that was wrong and just was morally wrong. I mean, it was just wrong across the board. I didn't have to be saved because I was taught that, and not only taught that by my parents, but also through observation. And I knew that they were wrong, and wasn't no one going to force me to do something that I knew was wrong. And this is a thing about its morality involved, but it's also politically charged, because I really think that when President Obama was in office, I'm not blaming him for everything, but I really think that when he was in office and he was seeking a second term in the presidency, I think he really thought about this thing seriously, but he thought with the wrong mind. He thought that he would actually need this extra support to win the second term, and which I don't think he actually thought in depth enough that really what it was going to cause not only the problem that it's causing now, but eventually, according to the Bible, the scriptures, this nation is going to cost this nation for this.
Roy,
And,
I love it. I love the point you're making. I appreciate that so much, and it is really a tough thing with. As you mentioned in your earlier remarks, it's politically charged.
Yeah.
There is very, very tender issue, and the people who this is a Judeo-Christian nation with a lot of people who want to be sure America holds on to that heritage, and so this is, and it is going to be. We're not going to solve this issue no matter how this case comes out. There's going to be an ongoing discussion on this.
And Roy sort of touched on the point I made earlier. Before he was saved, he had certain things he sort of felt like was wrong, and he wasn't going to be dissuaded by that, but it wasn't based upon religion, really.
Yeah, and he also mentioned that he wasn't going to be forced to do something that he believed was wrong. Well, there are at least 2 justices of the Supreme Court and a whole lot of progressives that would say, we're not going to force you to do it either. Just go out of business.
Yeah.
Right? You have the choice before you. Do what we want you to do and agree with doing, or just don't do it. So that was the position that Jack Phillips was put in, right? Either don't do weddings or or do what we say.
And this do what we say or else you lose your business. It is a fundamental attack on your basic freedom to live in America. If you can't run a business and make your way, support your family and yourself without, unless you comply with the government's views on things like that touching your religion, you're really surrendering freedom. We come back. We're going to go off on talking about the prison reform movement, changing the topic. And so come back after the break. We're going to hit some new topics.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers, defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, hello there. Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Debbie Georgatos, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. I have around the Friday round table, which is always fun, Jeremy Dys from First Liberty and Dr. Merrill Matthews, Buddy Matthews from IPI.org. I always mean to mention that pointofview.net, this is a listener-supported radio show, which you just heard in our lead-in, and it just can't encourage you strongly enough. If you enjoy the things you learn here, and every week, every day when you come to the show, you can go to pointofview.net. You can read the links to the stories being talked about. There's just great guests, great commentary, 3 hours a day, all week long. It's just a great source for serious thinkers. And so I urge you to go to pointofview.net. And if you can support Point of View, they need it. They rely on people like you who value what you learn on pointofview.net. So I hope you can, on Point of View, hope you can do that. I'm also going to make a shameless plug for my own radio show since I have the mic. My radio show is called America Can We Talk? And if you're listening to this show and enjoy, my show is once a week, Sunday evenings, and 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. It's on Salem stations, but you can go on Facebook Live. We put the show out on Facebook Live from the show, from our station. So 6 to 8 p.m., America Can We Talk, every Sunday. And this week we have on Dave Bratt, who you just heard earlier today, the congressman, talking about things happening in Washington. We also have on the Republican who won the nomination to challenge, and he's going to be in the race this fall to challenge Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. And he thinks he can win. I mean, can you imagine getting a Republican in the Senate from Massachusetts? We'll just see about that, but he's pretty pumped up. So we have a lot of good topics. Hope you can tune in then. I'm going to take one more caller on the question. We have one more caller, Joyce from Texas. It's just talking about this rights of children being force-fed sex education. And I believe we have Joyce. Hi, Joyce.
Hi, hello. That's what I was wanting to talk about, is that you have been talking about adults having choices, but in the school system, these little children are being I would say indoctrinated into saying that this is all right. And I just don't think the children are old enough to make a choice and to be thinking about these things. And it seems like they're trying to push their agenda on the little ones before they're able to be old enough to understand and make a decision for themselves.
Joyce says,
and I think the children need to have rights.
Yeah, Joyce, thank you. That's a great point, and it's really kind of a good capstone to this conversation, because part of what happens is children being taught things in schools inconsistent with what their parents have taught them. Very challenging for parents, because you pretty much tell your kids, listen to your teacher, don't argue, But in this case, so it is a big struggle. We could probably spend a whole other hour just on this topic.
I think you have a case in Mansfield, Texas, isn't it, where a lesbian art teacher was highlighting the fact that she had a female wife, and some of the students went home and said, and these are elementary school, I think it was fairly young, and went home and mentioned it to the parents, and the parents came back and said, that's not something you need to be doing, and the school district put her on leave of absence, and I think that's sort of working through a court case right now, because I believe she's suing them.
Yeah, and that is a great example. But I think one of the things Joyce may have also been alluding to is very young age children. In California, the most egregious cases I'm aware of. Maybe it's happening everywhere, but curriculum for very young children, and it is, even though it's presented as a factual, as part of birds and bees sex education. If it is advocating for legitimacy and normalcy of transgenderism, gender identity, all of the what is trendy right now in American conversation related to sexuality being taught to young children. And when you are teaching it in school, it is devoid of morality, religious teaching, but it carries the implication it's factual, and it's real, and it's normal, and it's right. And their parents saying the kids are way too young in second grade to be discussing sexual identity, gender identity.
Well, I think just a good reminder of how important it is for parents to be involved in this stuff. To know what's going on in the lives of your kid, especially when they go to school. They're spending the majority of their life inside those walls up until the age of 18, so you better know what's going on. And more importantly than all that, make sure that you not only know what's going on, but are deeply involved with your local school district. In Texas, we've got independent school districts that we can come and speak into very, very clearly. But that doesn't always solve all the issues, so make sure you know what's going on at the state legislature and who's influencing what down there. And at the State Board of Education, the National Board of Education, pay attention. This is yet a government that requires your involvement. You need to be involved.
Love that. Okay, Joyce, that's a great point. Thank you so very much. Okay, I want to turn to this. We're in the last hour. As I said at the start, there's never enough time for all the good stories, but this is a huge thing happening in Washington, which is Senator McConnell, who is Republican Majority Leader in the Senate, has announced that unlike normal August recess, when the senators are dismissed at the start of August, and the senators want to go home because especially this year, there is a midterm election. So we have senators wanting to go home to their states and meet with their constituents and their donors and their campaign events and the rallies, whatever it is they're doing. And Mitch McConnell said, no, actually, you get 1 week and you're coming back. And there's been a lot of squabbling about that. And you all may have a different view on this. I just want to weigh in my 2 cents, which is, what we have been watching in Washington since the time President Trump won the presidency is the Democrat Party dragging their feet, not letting him fill out his own administration. This is an inherent right of a president to fill out his administration, especially the high-level positions, and the other aspect, and that is required. Some positions that President Trump or any president has to fill out, the Constitution requires they be confirmed by the Senate. Same with the nominees for the courts. The federal courts, the district courts and appellate courts, the Supreme Court require Senate confirmation of the president's nominations. And in the case of President Trump, I know numbers are hard to do in radio, so only do a tiny bit of them, but it's really good to make this point. The Republicans and President Trump have a very good point. The Democrats have been dragging their feet and not permitting this president to fulfill his administration. It is a means of undermining him. And they're using the process called cloture, which essentially is that they can force 30 hours of debate on every Trump nominee. It's a procedural tactic. That's what they're doing. As a quick summary of this, what is occurring, President Trump, so this was at the end of April of his second year, so now we're 2 months ago, but by contrast, President Trump has 119 fewer executive branch nominees confirmed by the Senate than the lowest number of the past 4 presidents. I mean, there are statistical bases for what President Trump is saying. This really is a problem. And it isn't just, it can seem like game playing, but you can't move your forward agenda without your administration in place. And so the term the White House is using is that the Senate is weaponizing cloture. And they really are. And
then the Democrats criticize the president for not filling out the various level of positions that are out there.
They do. It's an astonishing thing. And I'll tell you one other, in terms of cloture votes, in case you think that President Trump is complaining. Now, this is not a rah-rah for President Trump, because I can find plenty of things I do not care for that he said. But on the use of the misuse of cloture, President Trump, just from the start of his term until April this year, he has faced 89 cloture votes, contrasted with 11 in Obama's entire first term. More on this when we come back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, when the Apostle Paul made it to Athens, he was able to present the gospel to the Greek philosophers in a place known as the Areopagus. The Romans referred to it as Mars Hill. It was a place where various perspectives and ideas could be expressed, and today we call it the marketplace of ideas. Now, when I was in Athens, I was struck by the fact that you could see the Parthenon from this adjacent hill where Paul spoke to these philosophers about the unknown God. In fact, there's a plaque affixed to the hill that actually contains Paul's message in Greek for all to read and consider. Centuries later, John Milton gave a famous speech known as the Areopagitica, in which he defended the right of freedom of speech and expression. Those principles formed the basis for the modern justifications for free speech and marketplace, where various ideas and ideas can be expressed. The name of the speech was derived from the place where the Apostle Paul preached, as recorded in Acts 17. Following Milton were philosophers like John Locke and John Stuart Mill, who expressed the idea of a marketplace of ideas. They understood that truth could only be discovered if all views and opinions were considered. They rejected the idea of censoring viewpoints and banning topics and perspectives from an open, robust discussion. So why the brief history lesson? Well, I do so to remind us of the long and valuable tradition of a marketplace of ideas. That is not what you find on very many college campuses today. That is not what you find in some of the social media platforms. The academic elite and the media elite are quick to censor divergent views, especially Christian views. I think it is time for them to go back and learn the history of providing a marketplace of ideas. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. Okay, one last point I want to make, and maybe the two gentlemen at the round table want to chime in, but I want to make one more point about this. Senator McConnell, the majority leader, just saying there's not going to be an August break, and that was that there is now an effort. Some of the Democrats have said, okay, we'll cut a deal with you. And they've got a list of, because it's a combination of judicial nominees, filling the district courts and the circuit courts of appeal, and then also administration positions, which if they're not filled, I'm going to get that point in a second. The deal the Democrats are making is they will come up with a list of about 15 nominees. They'll say, okay, how about if we drop our cloture stunt and we're just going to go ahead and let you have these 15 and then you let us go home for August. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to hope McConnell says no way. You're going to get through all these nominees.
Absolutely. Plus, Senator Schumer sent him a note this week, a McConnell note saying, well, since we're going to stay in August, let's have lots of votes about how to make health care more affordable, lower insurance premium stuff. And the hypocrisy on this is unbelievable. Health insurance premiums are exploding because of what Democrats passed.
Amen.
Period. Because of what they did. Period.
Right. It's astonishing. And, I think Republicans, we were saying earlier, they haven't always done a stellar job messaging. They're equally poor sometimes at actually just using the power they have.
Yes.
The American people finally gave the White House to the Republicans, along with the majority of the Senate, majority in the House. And we need to use it, act like we understand that we are in charge and using it. And this is my particular little political thing on McConnell. I was inspired that he did this August recess thing, not just because he's going to force votes on these important things, but I think he's finally deciding, you know what, I think I better play ball with President Trump a little bit. I think the Senate has been dragging their feet, not helping on his agenda. I think the House is almost as bad. And I kind of like this. It's a little sign. Maybe he realizes, I think I better support this president.
I think Jeremy and I both agree that the only problem I have with McConnell doing this is he should have done it months ago.
Absolutely. I mean, goodness sakes, we were calculating up during the break. They've got 20 some odd seats, I guess, the Senate Democrats do to defend in the Senate. 24, I think, that we agreed on.
24, I think. 24
or so that they've got. The Republicans got to defend 9. I mean, why are we giving them a 4-day weekend to go home and campaign on these things?
You know they wouldn't do it for us.
They would not do it for us.
Why would we give them the entire month of August to go home and campaign and try to get rid of McConnell? Goodness sakes, I did not know that we would come down to the day that President Trump would be the most conservative guy in Washington, D.C. But this is
pro-religious freedom. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. He's been wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's remarkable to find that he's kind of calling. I think he's saying what most of us have wanted to say, and I think that's why he continues to have the 49% approval rating that he has, despite the cacophony of media interests trying to say otherwise and bring that number down. Because he's being straight with the American people. He's saying, "Come on, stop all this foolishness," and things like, maybe you shouldn't go home in August. In fact, I hope he maintains that commitment because there is a provision in the Constitution that allows him to recall the Senate. So maybe even if Mitch McConnell doesn't, he could still require the Senate to come back into session and to work on his America First agenda.
I love that. I think the American people are just cheering this on. And the other very serious point about all these appointments is there's so much conversation about and the term gets used widely in different ways, but about the number and power of the Obama holdovers in State Department, Department of Justice, FBI, Democrat Party holdovers, liberal holdovers, and the term is used deep state which I know has other implications. But the point is, there is a reason that these high-level officials that President Trump is trying to nominate need to be in the positions he's trying to put them in to begin to have his agenda, his administration, have more power in those agencies that are running, especially it seems like the Department of Justice and FBI, almost autonomously.
Right. You can undermine the president's agenda if you have people in there who radically disagree with what he is doing. We're seeing that, we think, in the FBI and some of the other things. But you can either stonewall the process, you can undermine it, and they need to be able to get them out. But some of these are important jobs. You need people in there to be able to fill them.
You can pass all the legislation in the world you want to pass through the legislative process, have the president sign it, but if there's nobody to carry that out and execute that law,
right,
then it's really pretty much worthless. And don't forget that when the Obama administration went out, many of the political appointees were pushed down into civil service positions. In other words, they were embedded inside those agencies in an agency that's very difficult to get rid of civil servants from. And so they're there continuing to do the work of the prior administration in contrast or maybe in opposition to the work of this president.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That was one of the early on laments of President Reagan when he said he finally had his agenda. He was in Washington. He had brought forward his agenda, but the layer of bureaucracy below the very top level, the layer of bureaucracy, people who'd been there for decades, they knew their agenda, they knew what they wanted to do, and they just weren't going to move on his agenda. If they could stall it in ways that the public never sees. And President Reagan was lamenting that way back when. Okay, changing the topic. And, again, if you want to call in, the number is 1-800-351-1212. But this is really interesting. There is a growing push, and it's in Congress. And we're going to get, by the way, I do recognize if you're listening to thinking, are they ever going to talk about the G7? Yes, the G7 summit started today, I think. Today. Okay, so we're going to get to that, but I want to hit
the
one.
The G6 plus one, I think, right? Didn't the president kind of get disinvited from that one?
He can come, but he can't talk.
He's going to leave early, too, at 10:30 tomorrow.
Oh, my gosh. Well, that is actually a very important thing we'll get to. But I do want to, this is an interesting thing for, people who love this country and want our country to be the best it can be. There's a lot of talk about prison reform, which the term prison reform is used really to refer to sentencing reform, criminal justice reform. And the basic thing, it actually a big part of it began in the state of Texas. We were talking about in the break, began with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, bringing out advocacy for just decriminalizing things that don't need to be criminal and reexamining sentencing. And so there's a push now in Washington to bring that to the national level. And the particular bill that did make it through the House, which is called the First Step Act, and it was passed by the House, and it's basically looking at criminal justice reform, prison and sentencing reform. And, this is one of those things that we were, it's a concept that appeals to everyone. You just can hardly stand as Americans to think that our justice system is unfair. You really can hardly stand to think if it's unfair based on race or ethnicity, that somehow, that is just ardently, profoundly against the core of what the idea of America, that we have this justice system, we have justice is blind, we have a rule of law, it applies the same to everyone. So the notion that is out there and has some legitimacy to it is, a system isn't perfect, isn't fair, and needs fixing. The difficulty is always in the details. And so before I launch into something I was reading about this, do you have any kind of general comments, either of you, about the justice system and prison reform?
This is tangential to it all, but let me say this, that it's been interesting in recent days that the president has issued some commutations, some pardons and that sort of thing. It's been interesting to see who he's commuted and pardoned. I thought this president was supposed to be very racist and against these things, but they all seem to be African Americans. And one in particular who was given the lady, I guess was it Kim Kardashian?
Yeah,
these
Kim
are the things I
Kardashian.
pick up in the airport, frankly,
Right.
so I haven't watched these things closely enough,
Kim
I guess.
Yes.
But Kim Kardashian pushed one lady who was engaged in some crime, and I agree, but was given a life sentence. It was way over sentenced. I think everybody agreed with it all. African American grandma. Why isn't he getting kudos for all that? There's another gentleman that was a boxer from
he
years
was
back.
actually being criticized for it.
Of course.
Well, yeah, he was. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's almost as if someone was drowning in the middle of the river and he walked out there and rescued them from drowning in the water, walked on the water and pulled them out and walked on the water back there, that they'd be accused of getting the guy wet.
Mm-hmm.
It's remarkable how he can do some great things and still, by the way, don't take that analogy too far. I didn't mean it to go very far. I just wanted to point out the wetness part of that argument all. But the reality is that he's doing some good things, even when it comes to criminal justice reform, yet does not want to get credit for it.
One of the things that I've noticed in the Innocence Project, and the Innocence Project is where they go and they take DNA from people who've been convicted sometimes and been in jail for 10, 20, 30 years, and they go back and with the DNA, so they're able to say this person did not commit the crime. This is disproportionately black people, I believe,
Yes.
that I've seen. And so the Innocence Project has shaken my faith a little bit in the system, that the system is probably going to get it right in the vast majority of times. Maybe it does, but it seems like there's been a number of people who have been disproportionately affected negatively because of that. And the Innocence Project has done a good job of highlighting that.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anyone in America who's coming out against the Innocence Project. They're just so grateful to have anyone who was wrongly accused, tried, and convicted and sitting in jail who didn't do it. We love that notion. We come back. We're going to talk about even the case, Jeremy, that you mentioned relating to this woman that President Trump freed, this who was given a very long sentence related to a drug charge, and then the larger idea of just being careful in criminal justice reform. We don't go too far to where we aren't keeping America safe, and we're just kind of we're lurching too far in the other way. So come right back. We're going to talk criminal justice reform and the G7 summit too. Come right back.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View, so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. Debbie Georgatos sitting in. I love every time they ask me, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Have our Friday afternoon roundtable. Dr. Merrill Matthews from IPI, Institute for Policy Innovation. And we have Jeremy Dys from First Liberty. Okay, so we're talking about the prison reform movement and some things happening in Washington. There is a First Step Act that actually passed the House, the United States House. And one example, that I think this is up, I can't remember if I sent this. I believe this is up at the pointofview.net website, but if you don't find it there, it's at Conservative Review by Daniel Horowitz. And he's basically talking about how, in this understandable mission to not overcriminalize, to not have a bigoted justice system, to have it be fair, there's a movement, and actually it's not. Often in the past, these kind of movements are mainly from the American left or from the Democrats, but actually this is a lot of support from the American right, from conservatives and from conservative states, even Texas. But the one particular thing that this was making the point was the change, one big change in this bill, First Step Act, which probably has no chance to pass in the Senate, but in the House. The Bureau of Prisons right now, under current law, may release a prisoner into home confinement for the final 6 months or 10% of the sentence, whichever is less. So basically, they have the discretion to do that. And so this changed the law to say they shall release anyone who has lower risk levels and lower needs of home confinement for the same period of time. So it's kind of taking away discretion on behalf of the Bureau of Prisons to say, should this guy or woman be released early or not? And this is the endless tussle too in these kind of issues is, are we better with laws that put discretion and trust in the judges and the Bureau of Prisons, or you get biased that way, or are you better? So what is better off?
Well, I don't know, but they're probably not discussing this much with the public because the public in general sort of pushes back with the notion that somebody who is a previous offender coming out of jail is going to be living in the house next to me, especially if that person has been a sex offender. So it's a struggle for them because on the one hand, we probably do have a lot of people in jail who may be better off if they had the proper training and so forth, working in the workforce, if you were able to provide that. But there's a large, as you point out in that piece, there's a fairly large recidivism rate from people who get arrested again after they've been an offender.
Yeah, I'll tell you that statistic, just so we have, this is another Conservative Review article, but the Department of Justice put out an updated study this past Wednesday from the Bureau of Justice Statistics showing that 83% of prisoners released by states under, and this author, Daniel Horowitz's term, jailbreak programs, but he says, but 83% of prisoners released by states under jailbreak programs similar to what just passed in Washington are rearrested within 9 years of their release. And so, it's just the idea that somehow releasing them from jail earlier helps their lives, makes society safer, doesn't seem to play out. On the other hand, and in fact, so it's a very challenging thing. I think we were talking in the break about this, but you want America to seem fair. And so there is a problem if you have lived a life of criminal lifestyle and you've engaged in whatever it is you're doing, drug trafficking or whatever it is you're doing. If you get out of prison and you go back to the same neighborhood that you live in and all your allies who you used to hang around with are still there and you don't have a job and it's hard to find a job because most employers don't want to hire someone with a record, you may leave prison thinking, I never want to be in jail again, but you get out and you can't find something else to do. You can't.
Yeah, and the great irony is that there are many people that are out there from a religious perspective that want to help these people and want to help them transition from a life of crime to a life of productivity and contributing to the society around us. There's a case we did here actually in the state of Texas some years ago called Barr versus Sinton, in which the city of Sinton, Texas wanted to there was a pastor there. Pastor Barr had a ministry to ex-cons, and he had a halfway house kind of a setup there where he'd welcome them from prison, get them rehabilitated, and get them ready to reenter society, provide them with opportunities for work, teach them a few things, and also give them instruction on his faith. And the city there decided to zone everything such that his ministry could not exist anywhere inside that town. And they did it through, quote, neutral means and everything, but there was no place for him to be able to locate his house there. This is why the state of Texas passed the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This is why the United States Congress passed the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, to make sure that cities, although they may use neutral means, are still not engaging in discrimination by keeping these kinds of things out. This happens throughout our country all the time right now, and I think there are more instances than we are aware of in which cities are saying, we don't really want those people in our backyard, the NIMBY approach, so put them way out there so they don't have to be. It's a secondary punishment that is being offered to them because they're violating the Constitution. Whereas you have people that are wanting, from the goodness of their hearts, from the motivation of their religious beliefs, to help these individuals transition and be productive citizens, yet we keep on holding them. I think there's all kinds of ways we could discuss even more of opportunities like this, and yet we have, to tie back to the first hour, or I guess the second hour, we've got state government officials that act with hostility towards that type of religion. I hope that will end so that we can be more compassionate and caring for those people coming back to society.
Given a country right now where we have very low unemployment, some states are looking at trying to move prisoners into work, which they need. They need to be able to get the skills and so forth. But on the other hand, there were years ago abuses of that work program for prisoners, and it's hard to find a balance there. You want to be able to get them trained and working so that when they come out, they can take those skills and move directly into something. On the other hand, you don't want to give them too much freedom to abuse prisoners and use them for purposes that they shouldn't be.
I don't know if you both saw. I just was thinking while both of you were talking. There was a story out this week about somebody who had been in prison a long time. Had done something really bad, but he was in prison a long time and somehow was befriended by, he got a Bible in prison and began reading the Bible, and he was eventually befriended by a pastor, and he got out. And so this guy, this long-term prisoner, and the pastor are now really close, and I was just thinking that, the programs we have in prison for chaplains, people, because the truth is, if you get out of prison and your life was bad enough to start with, that you went down a path of crime and you ended up in prison, what may have been lacking was some sense of faith and some sense of a purpose in life. And I love all the chaplain programs. I've never done that, but I love those chaplain programs that are just trying to bring the message to everyone, no matter what you've done in your life. There's still opportunity for redemption and grace and forgiveness and a place and a purpose and a future. I mean, it's heart melting. Every story you read like that. And you saw that President Trump called one of them up if you saw this, but Trump called somebody up to the front of giving a speech and had him tell a story. And then the pastor who had brought him around was up there too. Unbelievably heart-melting.
Those are great stories. But if you are a state actor and have a view like the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had, that religion is a form of bigotry that has been used for nefarious things, from Nazism to the Holocaust and slavery and justifying all those things, then you're going to always look with skepticism at anybody wanting to engage in reform from a religious perspective. You're going to say, no, we don't want you to come here, and therefore you're going to be a part of the problem because you're going to contribute to further recidivism. You're going to say you're not qualified because you're religious. You're not qualified to participate in this reform effort, so you go over there and do your own thing, but don't involve yourself with us. And so you're removing a significant segment of our society that is geared and ready and wanting to help and motivated to help, not because of temporal circumstances, but because of their eternal perspective.
We've had some of these situations in which people were making sandwiches or food or something and handing them out to people, Skid Row, poor people, and the state came in and said, "Well, wait a minute, you're not a fully licensed kitchen, so you can't hand out sandwiches and things of that nature in there because you're not licensed by the state. So you got to stop doing that." And these people are starving; they need food, and they're not necessarily able to afford it someplace. But you can't do it because you don't have that license.
Proving Ronald Reagan's great truthism, right? That I'm from the government and I'm here to help is among the scariest words ever.
I think that's so true. And honestly, this movement that really started long before President Trump came along, but trying to limit the scope of government, to bring government back into perspective, the federal level and the state level. If government thinks it's their job to get in the middle of someone who's trying to help someone who's coming out of prison, trying to help someone who's starving, the idea that governments has a better role to worm its way in and control and limit that, it really is limiting kind of the goodness of the American people who want to help each other. I think this is a country full of good people who want to help each other. And this big government role is saying, well, but you're not licensed and you didn't wear the right kind of gloves and you did whatever it is they did. It's so unfortunate. It's such a diminishment of all the goodness America could be providing. Okay, so this is our last break. This does race by in 3 hours, but we're going to turn to one of the biggest stories of the day, which is the G7 summit started today. Come right back.
Economist Walter Williams says it's dishonest to boast about the nation's highly touted 80% high school graduation rate. The National Assessment of Educational Progress for 2017 showed that 63% of 12th graders were not proficient in reading and 75% were not proficient in math. Dr. Williams says when it comes to college, there's a big disconnect when only 37% of white graduates test college ready, and yet about 70% are admitted to colleges. For black students, the disconnect is greater. 17% of black high school graduates test as college ready, yet colleges admit 58% of them. Colleges cope by offering remedial courses and majors with few analytical demands. These courses often include the term studies in their titles, ethnic studies, gender studies, etc. And sadly, ill-prepared graduates often major in education. Walter Williams is not the only economist asking the question, how necessary is college anyway? Brian Kaplan, like Dr. Williams, is a professor of economics at George Mason University. He wrote a book titled The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. He told the Wall Street Journal that a college education is worthwhile for the individual. Full-time workers with bachelor's degrees are making, on average, 73% more than high school graduates. Yet, he says, many majors and fields of study really don't teach things that students will use in the jobs they eventually get. He asks, why is it that employers would pay all of this extra money for you to go and study a bunch of subjects that they don't actually need you to know? Dr. Kaplan says getting a college degree signals someone will be a good employee. But today, a college degree is a prerequisite for jobs that once did not require one. We need to ask, is the public and personal money spent today on education buying us enough? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to the final segment of Point of View today. I'm so glad you've tuned in. Debbie Georgatos sitting in for Kirby Anderson on our Friday roundtable, which is always so much fun to do. We have Dr. Merrill Matthews from IPI, Institute for Policy Innovation, and Jeremy Dys from First Liberty. And our number to call in, but you better hurry up because only a few minutes left, 1-800-351-1212. Okay, so G7 started today. Mm-hmm. And G7, if you could just tell us, buddy, because I know you're very familiar, just the briefest of background. G7 started like 1997?
Yeah, these are the industrial, considered the industrialized countries. So it's several European nations, Japan, the U.S., Russia had been part of it. Russia was excluded because of its invasion of Ukraine. And then President Trump has called today for Russia to be re-included in that. I suspect most of the other countries don't want that, but we'll see. So they get together to talk about major economic issues and to work together As it turns out, the president has alienated almost all of them except for Japan. I think Shinzo Abe and Japan are generally okay with us right now, but he is sort of alienated most of the G7 countries right now. Canada, several European, France, Germany, several of those countries.
Well, one thing I noticed, and so G7, to be clear, it's, they're endless international conferences. It's really focused on trade and economics.
Yes,
it's
typically focused on trade and economics.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention was that, not finding it quickly, but there was a statement signed by almost all of them denouncing President Trump's imposition of tariffs and just criticizing he puts tariffs on steel and aluminum, basically related to Canada and Mexico and the European Union. But his point was that the other producers, not Canada and Mexico, but that other producers that have certain limits are bringing more of steel and aluminum into America through Canada and Mexico. I mean, isn't that the reason he said this tariff had to be in Canada and Mexico?
Well, he imposed it there, and we're not entirely. I think most of this is jockeying to try to get them to lower their general tariffs. The President Trump says the problem that we're having right now is that other countries impose higher tariffs on our products and more restrictions than we do on them. So I went to the World Trade Organization because it actually tracks this stuff and tries to come up with a composite. And in fact, Trump is generally right. If you look at that, according to the WTO, they do a kind of a composite, what they call an average applied most favored nation tariff. The U.S. is one of the lowest there. We're about 3.5. Canada is a little over 4. Mexico 7. And I do this little chart based upon generally how much we trade with them. European Union is at 5. China is over 9. But Hong Kong is 0. Singapore is nearly 0.
Okay, so does Trump have a fair point about this or not? Because honestly,
he has a fair point. They, on average, because it varies with the product and the industry and so forth, but on average, they impose higher tariffs, more restrictions than we do. What he's trying to get them to do is to lower theirs. And he's doing it by raising our tariffs and so forth on them. Whether that's a good strategy, I'm not sure, but there are ways to try to push this and to try to get them to lower their tariffs, because ideally you want all countries lowering their tariffs and restrictions so that you have a freer trade. President Trump says, I'm for free trade. I just want it to be fair. We have they affect us a lot more than we affect them.
I love that you have this data. I'm going to take a picture of this before you leave because I like this chart. But back to China in particular, and tying back to a topic from the first hour, China, there has been concern about our trade relationship with them because they are considered to be more likely to be doing theft of intellectual property. Right. They engage in, unfair trade practices can sound kind of nebulous or kind of weak. But man, if you're
very hard for people to understand.
Yeah, but if you're stealing intellectual property,
property and what's called tech transfer, where they, as companies, if you're in a U.S. company and you want to work with China on something, they typically have said, yes, but you have to work with one of our companies. The Chinese company would say, you have got to give us your technology, access to your technology, if you're going to be a partner with us. So we transfer the technology, allowing them to sort of jumpstart them because they don't have to produce it themselves. So U.S. companies have complained about this for some time. There's also intellectual property theft, trademark and copyright theft.
Yes,
so if you're buying a fake Coach bag or something, there's a fair chance it was made in China, looking like a Coach bag, even maybe having the Coach brand on there, but it's not actually a Coach bag.
So this has been occurring over decades. This didn't just happen overnight.
No, this is not new.
But President Trump is stepping up and saying this has to end. We're going to adjust this somehow. So is he handling this well, trying to correct what China's wrongdoing is by raising tariffs?
There are processes to go about lowering tariffs and ways you do this. And what you want to do is you want the other countries lowering their tariffs and restrictions that they impose on us. He's doing it by saying, we're just going to step in and start imposing tariffs on you. It doesn't sound great when you're saying we're trying to do this for national security reasons. He can do it under a U.S. law from the 1960s that allows you to do it for national security reasons. It sounds even dumber when you say we may impose tariffs on your cars because of national security reasons. Nobody thinks you have a national security interest in driving a Ford versus a Kia. but they're using it as a way to pressure that, and we'll see if it works. I'm not entirely sure it will work, but if it pressures them right now, they're pushing back.
Well, I have to say, last time, or not it was last time, but sometime 2 or 3 months ago or more, I hosted at this show, Point of View, and you were my guest, and we were talking about tariffs at that point. And I learn a lot every time I listen to, and I appreciate all your expertise about it. There's a gut feeling I think Americans have that they don't like thinking America, our country, just got taken advantage of.
Exactly
so
right.
They want Trump or whoever is the president and the administration to fix it, to be tough, to stand up. And I think that's the sense people have. I know there are economic considerations where tariffs are they're considered just inconsistent with the notion. They're like, free trade is kind of the international equivalent of free markets at home. It's just the notion of you shouldn't have restrictions on production.
Now, here's the great irony. In the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that was 12 countries that were around the Pacific.
Yeah.
They were dramatically lowering tariffs and restrictions in there, especially Japan and so forth. But Trump pulled us out of that shortly after he became president, said we're not going to do that. He's now said, well, we may go back and take a look at that, but those other 11 countries have moved on.
Yeah, we still, though, I would hope for those other countries, we have the capacity to enter one-to-one trade agreements versus, wasn't that part of his complaint was when it's multilateral, it's too hard to, you can't really.
That's absolutely right. If you're the biggest gorilla around, you have more power to be able to negotiate better deals on a one-on-one basis than when you're getting a whole bunch of countries there. So he's sort of pushed aside multilateral and wanted to go to bilateral, and now he's suggesting that maybe we'll move away from the NAFTA and just have a bilateral negotiation between us and Canada and between us and Mexico.
Okay, we're going to run out of time. This is so interesting. I could talk. I think this is so interesting, and this is where I'm really, really learning because I'm not as familiar as you are. But
Trump's general point of other countries penalizing us more with higher taxes is generally true.
That is good to know. Okay. We know 3 hours always race by in this show. If you're listening, I want to make several really important points. One is please go to pointofview.net. There's all sorts of great information. You can also support this listener-supported source for truth. I love that slogan they have. I'd love to have you support them. Also, I want to encourage you to go to firstliberty.org. And Jeremy Dys, who is here, been here today, it's just a premier national organization speaking up for religious freedom. And for IPI, which is I just lost it. I said
Institute for Policy Innovation.
I knew that. Just great. I go there sometimes just to kind of figure out a story. They always have the straight economic story, straight policy story. Great website. Love doing that. And also, one last pitch. If you go to AmericaCanWeTalk.org, that's my radio show website, and on Facebook, America Can We Talk. And we just love having you listen every week to Point of View. I hope you come back Monday, noon to 3. And thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great weekend.
Why does Kirby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy. But by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.